Welcome, everybody, to the Grand Reckoning, where we reckon that war is.
Yes, it's our controversial opinion that war is a bad thing.
We're coming in with some fresh opinions. Hopefully, we're going to be studying a different war for approximately a week each one to try to really point out how these wars are exacerbated by various interventions, in-group out-group dynamics, and just general screwery. We're coming in hot on Sudan next week, but to start with, we figured we'd let you guys know about a little bit about ourselves. Shaiel, Ben-Ephraim. Did I do it right this time?
Ben-Ephraim. Close.
Ephraim?
Yeah.
I have respect for you. That's why I try my best to learn your name. I don't care if I mispronounce Netanyahu's name. Sorry.
But his name you got right. What am I supposed to make of that?
Point being is, like, I'm trying. I grew up Southern, so I'm doing my best.
But now you're Northern.
Northern, depending on how you look at it. But anyway, I would like you to go ahead and explain your in-group, out-group dynamics overarching theory.
Sure.
Exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I think that human beings are attuned to create tribes and to find security in existing in a certain tribe. And in order to solidify that tribe, they tend to look for the other, for the external group that they can frame their identity against. And one of the things that makes human beings unique is our ability to create groups that are larger than those that we can see. That's what most groups do. They have their, they run in packs that they can see, that they can interact with. And we create these wider stories, so on and so forth. And a lot of our interaction with other groups is the attempt of leaders inside groups to solidify their control. So basically what we have here is illusions of identity that are created in order to cement control over other people, over resources. And the best way to do that is by framing it against another enemy. And I think that humanity has more commonalities, objectively speaking, than differences, right? And these divisions are very artificial. And if we look at wars that have been waged over the centuries, over the millennia, most of the causes over which they were fought seem completely irrelevant now. It's empires that no longer exist, defending kings that are dead, defending religions that no one follows anymore, and so on, so forth. And I think that it's very important that we keep that in mind when we're analyzing current conflicts, when we're analyzing wars and atrocities, that what's behind them is an illusion that tears us apart from human commonality. What do you think?
That's actually a part. I mean, I've reached that conclusion from a different approach, but this is something that I've said numerous times, is that groups aren't real. States aren't real. None of this is real. You know what I mean? What's real are human beings. This is where a lot of people on the Zionist side of it will get really angry at me when and also, funnily enough, the Palestinian side, when I say, I'm sorry, but states don't have the right to exist. Period. Only people have the right to exist. States have the privilege to exist by the consent of the people. It's a privilege. Any group that exists by the privilege of its members by assembling it. So by definition, that gets you to a lot larger picture too, where it's like, how do you figure out the responsibility of a group if you don't believe in collective responsibility? Well, that's because the group didn't do anything. People in the group did something. You see what I'm saying? So what I've pointed out, this is a big libertarian argument that's been made a long time, for a very long time, is that states generally serve the powerful as a diffusion of responsibility. So anything that an individual would normally have to be responsible for, you end up, if you're at the top of state power, you're not responsible for it. This is why, the idea that, when the Democrats and Republicans both will say no one is above the law, libertarians are like, come on, we know that's not like after a certain point, it becomes no longer justice in politics. Once you get to a certain level of power, you kind of are above the law. You can order the murder of another person and nothing happened to you. That's above the law, by definition, So the argument that I've always made is that, well, let's go to I think that if we're going to talk about this, for me, I think we should probably go to the very beginning. The very beginning of my principle comes from something called property right, right? So I believe that when you own your property, you have a right to do with it whatever you wish. And the most important piece of property that every individual owns is themselves. You own yourself. So because you own yourself, you have certain rights that come along with that, and that's to do whatever you wish with your body. You have the right to believe whatever you want to believe. You have the right to form groups and associations with whoever you want to form associations with. You have the right to trade your labor or your goods or whatever. Like anything any piece of property from nature that you mix your labor with becomes yours. This is the homesteading principle. So the idea is, to me, like all of this stuff comes from the right of self-ownership, and because I've put my labor into a lot of these things, it's inseparable from being part of my life. And so for you to take something from me without my permission is literally to take a piece of my life. If I spent, 40 years building a house and a farm and a situation, and then you come and take that, you took 40 years of my life from me. And so like all of this kind of comes out of that. A lot of people think this stuff sounds really good and awesome until certain applications start coming in. But we'll find out how that goes. It gives me interesting arguments for intentionality. Like a lot of people, for example, the war that you understand probably the best would be the Gaza war. And when they say, oh, well, we blew up this area because there was a Hamas guy here, but the kids that were in that building, we accidentally killed. It's like, no, you killed them on purpose. If you knew they were there and then you dropped a bomb on them, that's on purpose. Now, if you're saying it was unavoidable, that would be a different argument. But you're not saying that. You said you accidentally killed them. You knew what would happen if you dropped a bomb on them. So it's like I have a different belief of intentionality. I have a different belief of coercion. I would argue every single Jew that left Germany during the Third Reich was not voluntary. It was inherently coerced. So it's like things like that. It end up with different arguments to some people, but I think I end up in the same place with you on a lot of issues as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't really matter how you get there exactly. What matters is that you're looking at the rights and the interests of the individual instead of the collective, and that's where we meet. To me, private property is not that important. It's not that I'm against it. It's just not where I'm coming from. To me, what matters is human rights. Of course, property being one of those human rights. but ultimately we're arriving at the same place, that the collective, since it is an illusion to begin with, it doesn't really have rights, it doesn't actually matter. We invest a lot of effort into making the collective matter that would be far better invested into making the individual matter. And that's where I think political effort needs to go. We just put so much effort into maintaining these illusions, and the illusions only serve certain elites. They don't serve people in general. And a lot of our identities are irrelevant to modern problems, to modern issues. Even on a practical level, they were created in order to solve problems that aren't the main problems anymore. And we're finding increasingly that the most important problems on the international agenda are ones that we can't address and we can't solve because of our particularist identities, right? I was just looking at the attempts that they were having to limit plastics in that international treaty. I don't know if you saw that. They wanted to limit the amount of plastics that are being produced, and it would be good for pretty much every individual on Earth if we limited the amount of plastics that we made. But some governments, our government in particular, the United States and in China, want to produce more plastics, and instead of limiting it, focus on recycling, when recycling doesn't work at all. And so here you have what do you have here when you think about it? Why would a government want to produce more plastics when the health and environment outcomes from that are very well known to science? Well, because we have a meeting here of two artificial constructs, of two made-up identities. One is the state, China, the United States, and the other is companies and their lobbies that want to produce more plastics. Both of those are given legal standing through fiction. A fiction that companies have legal identity. A fiction that states have a legal identity. And those fictions, those fictional legal identities, take precedence over the health of every single human being on Earth, including the lobbyists and leaders who are working for it, not their pockets, but their health interests as well. And that gives you some idea of the mechanism that we're talking about here. That we invest so much time and effort and money into upholding harmful fictions over the reality of our existence as individuals.
Are very few individuals throughout history that I exalt as people. Most I exalt their actions specifically for obvious reasons. History is full of very flawed human characters. But there is a man named Thomas Paine who was the bard of the U.S. Revolution. I think it was John Adams, who was not a fan of Paine, famously said that the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain without the pen of Thomas Paine. So I think one of the things that he said that really I identify with, and that, especially helped my anti-war come around, was the world is my country, all people my brothers, and to do good is my religion. This is something I was actually talking about with my cousin today. He'll love being mentioned about this, but it was something I was saying, like, they'll, like the Hamas thing that we're talking about. Hamas goes and holes up in a school, right? And then they drop a bomb on the school, right? To take out the Hamas guy. And I was like, think about if it was like in Chicago, some gang had shot up a bunch of people and then ran and hid inside of a school in Chicago. And our solution was to drone bomb the school, right? Do you think anyone would say, yeah, well, it's all the fault of the gang guys that went and ran into school? No, they'd be like, look, you had such a total negligent disregard for our children's lives At a certain point, you have to work around that. You have to send a SWAT team in. You have to send all of this. And when I said this at the very beginning of the war, I remember people saying, well, that would risk soldiers' lives. And I'm like, yes, it would. But if we're asking the question of should we risk soldiers' lives or children's lives, this should be an easy answer for everyone involved. The fact that you have to stutter to make that argument tells me that you're falling into that trap that you yourself are explaining of that in-group out-group dynamics. There's no way in hell that you would accept this if it was done to your children. And so to me, it is being done to my children because, like I said, the world is my country. These are all my people. The human race is my people, and this is to me insane that you have this way of messing with people's head. It worked on me after 9/11. You know what I'm saying? It definitely did. So yeah, it's part of the reason why I'm so motivated to challenge it. It's also part of the reason why I also think it's such a big deal. If there's anything I can sell to anyone that would ever listen to this, it's don't punish people for doing what you want them to do. Piers Morgan came around late. You came around late, right? And everyone wants to sit here and attack people for that. And it's just like, dude, because of Piers Morgan coming around, we have millions of people watching and hearing the other side. If he's just playing, if he's being shiesty, who cares at this point? At a certain point, we just got to win the fight. You know what I mean? Let's stop being sore winners and welcome everyone to our side that's willing to come. You know what I mean?
Yes, but of course, our side, at least from my perspective, isn't the Palestinian side. It's the side.
That's why I said anti-war.
Yeah, it's the side of the humanity of individuals over this, supposed safety or interests of the collective. And I loved your example about the soldiers. Soldiers are people who are, their professional role is to put themselves in danger for the betterment of society, at least in theory. It's not what they actually do, but in theory, to protect
That's not what
civilians.
skill children are for.
Yeah. And because Israelis value the lives of every Jew more than they value the lives of every Palestinian, they think that saying risk the lives of soldiers is a good argument, and of course it isn't. It isn't. There's no reason why an Israeli life is more important than a Palestinian life, or vice versa. So that's really how we have to look at these conflicts. So what we're going to try to do in this show is look at ways where we can overcome these divisions, these preconceptions in different conflicts, show how these dynamics of enmity, these fictions of hatred are causing conflicts all around the world. And also, one of the things that we'll be interested in here are interventions of other countries. So there's not a single civil war in recent history, maybe in entire human history, where there haven't been interventions of foreign powers.
I mean, the Revolutionary War was a proxy war. The American Revolution was a proxy war between France and Britain.
Classic example of a proxy war, and that's not how you learn it in school.
Definitely
in
not.
the United States, but that was
France
reality.
loved us so much.
Yeah, it's the complete misunderstanding. That's true for every war that Israel fought as well, and every war that anyone fights. And people sort of argue. I see this argument online a lot. Is this a civil war or is it a proxy war? It's both. Every civil war in
Always.
history is a proxy war. And external actors look to solidify and contribute to internal disputes that serve their interests. And the domestic leaders look to shape their identity very often in a way that's going to get support from external actors. Like the Cold War is the classic example of this. You had people fighting all around the world for whatever reason, power, ethnicity, resources, and one guy would be like, "I'm a big free market Democrat." The other guy would be like, "I'm a big Marxist," and then give me weapons, And then when the Cold War ended, no one pretended to do that anymore. Now they were fighting for ethnic reasons. That was more fashionable.
Yeah, Israel, the support for the state of Israel being created was a large part due to the Cold War.
Yeah, absolutely.
The backing.
The Soviet Union voted for its existence in order to piss the British off. The British supported the Arab states in order to get rid of Soviet influence. The United States, which was sympathetic to the Jews, put an arms embargo on it because they didn't want to go against their British friends, so on and so forth. There's always those elements. And
Speaking of, we can do a fun plug here. When are you doing that? Starting the History of Israel podcast back? Because
you know what? Let me give a date so that I have to do it because I keep putting it off. I will have it by the end of this month. Yes.
I tweeted that was the only legitimate criticism of you.
There's a lot of legitimate criticism of how long I've been putting this off. That's for sure. Yeah. So I have it's actually a very interesting test case, my podcast, aside from plugging it, and of course everyone has to listen to it, but I had this podcast. It was moderately successful. People listen to it. I have 200,000 people listening to it. It's done pretty well. It's called the History of the Land of Israel podcast. And I did it when I was a committed Zionist. I started it. I never intended it to be sort of the history of the Jews in the land of Israel, because I was never that kind of guy. I wanted to sort of show all the cultures that had been there, including Jews. But it was mostly marketed towards Jews. That's why I named it what I named it. And it was quite successful in that regard. And now, I don't like the name anymore. History of the Land of Israel. It makes it seem like it's just intended for Jews. And Jews have a very important role in the history of the land, but it's just not the only story.
Adar, I've talked to him, and he was saying that he likes to use the terminology "the land of Israel and Palestine" because it pisses both ends off, because he's including everyone.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that.
It's accurate but unwieldy. Yeah, I saw his tweet about that.
I don't know if you want to piss too many people off trying to get them to listen to your podcast, though.
I want to piss everyone. I mean, I'm so. The thing about me is I'm so good at pissing people off, at least on Twitter. People always say when they see me talking on video, I'm very reasonable. But on Twitter, I have this natural gift for pissing everyone off. And so I don't have to try, it just comes naturally. But yeah, so what I named it instead is Histories of the Holy Land. That way, I call it Histories, like it's plural, and then also Holy Land focuses on what makes the land unique without giving it a name. And it also recognizes, at least in theory, the holiness to all the religions. So I made it a more inclusive name, and I'll relaunch it. And I'll start with the history of the Philistines. I've already done most of the history of the biblical era. The Philistines is a bit difficult because we don't have that many sources. the Jews always wrote a lot, so they have a lot of written sources.
Well,
So
that's one of the things that the Jews, Israelites, all of that's one thing that's again another very admirable thing about their culture is it's been literate pretty much the entire time.
yeah.
Yeah, so like that's pretty unique compared to most cultures where like the average guy who's herding goats knows how to read and write comparative to
Well,
other places. Like I said, yeah, that's not
well,
everyone, but you know what I mean.
it's not. That's not 100% accurate. I mean, you by the time the Israelites started reading and writing, in Babylon and in Egypt, and it was already a very old thing. And people have been reading and writing for over 1,000 years, and more among their neighbors. They were kind of latecomers. You know, the first Israelites were.
And that's what from what I've understood, that's why they did really well in a lot of European countries when they showed up was because of the fact that they had such a higher literacy rate amongst them.
They did, but that's part of the region. So writing comes from the Levant and the surrounding area. You know, from
That is,
Babylon, Egypt.
yeah, because of the what do they call them? The oh, Lee, it's just escaped my mind. The first people who wrote the Sumerians that
Yeah,
were
the Sumerians
from that,
yeah.
yeah, because I know
So
they're from that area.
yeah, the first writing is in Babylon and the Mesopotamia. Then you have it in Egypt. Then you have it in Greece. Then you have the Israelites. The Israelites, when those other cultures were writing, the Israelites didn't even exist yet. The Israelites exist from around 1200 on. But yeah, but it's a
Well, not
regional
to
thing.
get too much on a tangent, I'm just
Yeah, it's a
curious.
tangent, but it's a regional thing. But then becomes a myth of like the Israelites. In Western Europe, writing came much later. That's all.
Yeah, I'm just generally a nerd, so like I'm addicted to knowledge. I love learning anything, history in general. Like I'm down for it, so I'm gonna keep pestering you about that. Part
By
of the
the end of
reason
the
I
month,
bring
I'm
up
gonna
our
have that
plugs,
Philistines thing out. Yeah.
the part of the reason I'm bringing up our plugs is, support our other podcasts. I also have a podcast called Dad Influence Podcast, where I talk about how politics, war, and a lot of these things affect our children. And sometimes I do a few, specifically just child development thing. I think the next episode I'm going to do is talking about how to build relationships and set the example and teach your kids how to build effective relationships. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be how we make money. Any money, I don't even think I'm going to set up a Patreon or anything for this. I think the game for this is going to be we're going to link for every single episode some kind of way for you guys to help these people that are in these issues. So if it's Sudan and we're like saying, we want to address X, Y, and Z hunger, here's the people that you can give money to help hunger in Sudan. Now, that's what I want to do. Once we get enough monetization, the same thing will happen every week. We will send that monetization to whatever we have decided. So spread this far and wide. Even if you can't stomach listening to some of the horrific things, hit play and walk away from the computer if you have to. We want to run these numbers up so that way we can force YouTube's advertisers to pay for a lot of this stuff. We're gonna turn the Mr. Beast model against war.
Yes, and we're gonna make way more than him because we're gonna be way more popular than Mr. B. And that brings me to something very very important to me and probably to you as well, which is the humanitarian issue, and that's going to be very very front and center here, and it's becoming front and center in my life and my way of thinking of the world. There's so many crises right now in the world. humanitarian crisis, Sudan being possibly the most acute, Gaza maybe second. There's no point in rating them, really. There's a few others. Congo.
It's not a competition.
Not a
Definitely shouldn't be.
competition, but let me rank them anyway. Yeah, I was raised ranking, baseball players, movies, and we have a real serious problem in fulfilling the needs of the victim. Now, there's always been too few resources and too many people who need them. There's nothing new about that. But in the current world, with the Trump administration cutting U.S. aid and the inflation and just general desensitization to international suffering, all the humanitarian organizations don't have a real deficit of funds, have a real deficit of resources. And again, a lot of the resources are instead going to governments, going to corporations, going to places that, in my opinion, need them less. And a lot of governments, and sometimes it's not a coincidence, governments and corporations sometimes work against humanitarian organizations because they try to limit their actions, they try to hold them accountable for crimes, they try to stop their profits from companies, especially when they're exploiting developing countries and their resources and so on and so forth. So very often we see actually it's a competition between humanitarian organizations and states and corporations. And no one speaks for the corporations. Sorry, everyone speaks for the corporations. No one speaks for the humanitarian organizations because they don't have the same kind of money. They don't have the same kind of pull. And so what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to speak for humanitarian organizations. We're going to bring people on from humanitarian organizations to speak for themselves. And we're going to try to raise money for humanitarian organizations because there's people who need help so much, and their stories are not being covered. And there's very often there's reasons why the story's not being covered. It's not just because no one wants to see it because it's not popular, but also because some of the powers that be don't want your concern to go there because it goes against their interests.
This is actually something that I've posited numerous times as a libertarian. I have such an issue with the state handling a lot of these things for that reason. Is like you have U.S. aid, which they use to justify taking our money and say, hey, we're going to take your money in taxes because we want to fund these humanitarian organizations who are doing good work. So they take our money, then they fund the organizations for a little while. Now we get a guy that rug pulled those organizations, took all that money out of it, which I have no problem. Like, if you were to give me all my money back as taxes, a large portion of that would probably go towards these kind of things. But because it's tied up in taxes, they're able to redirect it now to some other thing that they want to enrich some friend of theirs that, and which is already was happening before with the U.S. aid, where they were funneling money through certain things to get back to their little friends. And it's sad too, because like I said, there are people who are literally, like, to me, this is like one of the highest forms of evil. It's like embezzle money from a company that's selling, TVs is bad, right? But to embezzle money meant to save people from starving to death, from cholera, like, to me, that's just such a higher form of evil.
Yeah. And now this is where you and I differ. To me, the state being involved isn't a problem as such. I only care about one thing. I only care about the efficiency of the help that is given to people who are most needy. So
Well, me too. To be clear, me too. But that's the reason why I'm against the state.
well, I'm against the state the state is an illusion that at this point is very harmful. And we totally agree on that. It exists. And what I would like to see the states do, as long as they exist, is facilitate the work of humanitarian organizations as well as they possibly can, which is not what they are doing in any way, shape, or form. So to me, I would like to look at a study and say, how much seed money is the government bringing, and does that, limit the amount of donations that people are giving? Does it encourage? How do you encourage more? Just to see the right amount of money and resources get to the right place. I'm very much a pragmatist in this regard. I just want to see the end result benefit as many people on the ground as possible. And
Like
that's
I said, we
definitely
definitely
something.
agree on the end result, which is that like these people get what they need,
Yeah.
So I
And
don't disagree there at all.
my whole training, career-wise and all that, was always in wars. I have a PhD in military strategy and so on and so forth. And I find now I don't know enough about what it actually takes to help people. That's something I really want to learn, and something that I want us to do here. There's plenty of people who are
Yeah, my
experts on
training's in
that.
economics, so like I know what the tragedy of the commons is. I know what something what golly, it just popped out of my head. Why does this stuff keep popping out of my head? What was it called? I can't remember. It's a phenomenon that it's making the argument. Let me just make the argument. All people are self-interested, whether they work for the government, they work for a humanitarian organization, they work for anywhere. They're all self-interested. And so if you put a person in charge of something, they're generally going to use that to serve themselves. Now, if that person joined the humanitarian organization because they wanted to do good things, and to them that makes them feel better, then the serving of themselves will be them doing great things for the humanitarian organization. But if you have somebody in the government, this is where you end up with these issues of the people who end up in the government are all enriching themselves and their friends because they're working towards their own self-interest, not the public's interest, even though they're supposed to. And this is the case in all cases. It's what me and you have talked about with public choice theory. That's what it's called. Couldn't think of it. But this is what we're talking about, where it's pretty obvious that the smart move for Netanyahu right now is to end the war, but he's not, because there's all these political interests that outweigh that. So
Well,
it's like
smart in
they start
what
to,
regard? Like, what is he trying to
yeah,
achieve?
exactly. So it's about is he acting in the interest of Israel, or is he acting in the interest of himself? And generally, whenever you have a state, that's what happens: is the actors act in their own interests rather than the acting in the state's interest. So that's generally the argument that I would make of why I think these things are so inefficient, is because these guys have such a high, especially in a democracy with terms. I only have 4 years to make as much money as I can in my pocket before I'm out of here. So a lot of these people come in and they loot as hard as they can until they're gone.
Yeah. But a lot of this question of what we're trying to achieve is also social. Ultimately, money doesn't mean anything unless we give it meaning. And in our society, we give money the meaning of whether you're a winner or a loser. We give it consequences that are far beyond having a car or far beyond having a house. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because as a society, we can engineer or influence the goals that people pursue that they believe are in their self-interest. And you could conceivably create a society where pursuing the greater good gives you greater honor, which is then in your interest. I completely agree with you that self-interest is a strong human motivator.
I'll be right back. I gotta
Yeah.
go to the restroom, but I can hear you. I promise.
And there's no way around that. There's no way around the fact that self-interest is a motivating factor. But we can shape socially what that self-interest is. Right now, we reward being patriotic to the nation, which, if you look at it as an illusion, can be seen as kind of dumb. We reward being good looking. We reward making money. And if instead we rewarded working for other people, we rewarded resolving conflicts, we rewarded all of these more noble goals that serve people, the self-interest, the element of the self-interest could be more profitably used for the good of mankind. So the thing about rationality, we often talk about how human beings are rational or not rational, but the thing about rationality is it's a calculation of cost benefit in terms of reaching any goal. But what we can't calculate rationally, and is always emotional, is what the goal is. There is no rational goal in a universal sense. Some people might value their families above everything else. Some people might value their country over something else. Some people might value money above whatever it is. Artistic achievement, all those things we look at as self-interest. But we determine what the interest that we follow is. What the rationality is the question of cost benefit. We all do cost benefit, but cost benefit to what? Right? If you're a junkie, you're doing cost benefit to getting your fix. And your rationality is constantly that. But it's not rational in any objective sense to want to get your fix of heroin or whatever that's going to kill you. So what we need to do is make that self-interest, that rational self-interest, more useful to society. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to talk about here.
I swear I got like 9 books you need to read because you're saying stuff that
there's nothing
you're
original
talking
here.
about. Like, but the thing is, this is the thing that I've said. The kind of a theme of the conversation that we've had, which is that like you can reach a lot of these same conclusions from a different angles. The Tao Te Ching is the religious quote unquote text, but the philosophical text, if you ask me, of Taoism, the yin yang thing. And if you go and you read that, it's early libertarianism, period. And it has been reached from a philosophical, philosophical approach rather than from a economic approach, which is what you see later. When free markets start taking over, that's when people start going, hey, what is this thing here? Maybe we should apply this in more places. If you look at but you can look at this thing, what you're talking about specifically is something that Mises posited, and it was called in a book called Human Action, and this is where he introduces his theory of praxeology, which I actually is another big base belief that I use, which is that all humans act in self-interest, right? So every action that you're taking is in your own rational self-interest, and all humans are rational. In this formulation, he would say that a crack addict doing everything to get crack is a rational action because it is an action that is meant to achieve a purpose, right? So if you take this formulation, like a rain dance for rain would also be a rational action. And so the argument that he's making is that if you had a free market where you have people taking their own rational actions, the actions that were more beneficial would rise to the top, and the actions that were less beneficial would sink to the bottom, definitionally. And that's kind of a lot of his ideas, and it's also how I develop my predictions a lot of times for what leaders are going to do, is because if I can sit here and watch what you're doing, I can use that to reverse engineer what your intent is. If I know what your intent is, I can know how you're going to react to the next thing. Does that make any sense?
Makes perfect sense. But
so
of course,
this will give you a lot better predictions than any other way of predicting anything.
Yeah, you have to understand why a leader is doing what they're doing. Yeah, once you do that, you know what they're doing, and that's and you can't. And bringing us back to resolving conflicts, to humanitarian issues, unless you understand what's motivating leaders to continue these wars, you can't possibly resolve them. And unless you
And you have to
understand,
realize that everybody's got to take their deal home and say they won. That's something that peacemaking that a lot of people don't get. I've seen you criticizing the meeting between Trump and Putin, and that's something that I would say is like I actually cheer it on. And the reason I cheer it on is because we have to reach peace. And I think as much as me and you would both love Putin to see the ICJ, Netanyahu to see the ICJ, let's
ICC.
be honest, it's ICC. But as much as both of us would love to see that, in reality, it's probably not going to happen. And, I think both of them would probably start flinging nukes before they saw those courtrooms. So I think that you also have to come to a point where you realize, hey, we have to figure out how to fix this going forward, if that makes sense, and stamp it down at the moment. I don't know exactly what that is, but I'm saying, I don't see him at the ICC tomorrow.
I don't either, and I agree with you, but I don't agree with you that the meeting was good, and I'll tell you exactly why. When I look at what Putin is doing, his calculations are mostly domestic. I think that one of the things that we forget about the war in Ukraine is how bad the standing of Putin was before this war. You had these demonstrations, you had this erosion, you had that Pussy Riot band, you had all these things that everyone's completely forgotten about. And traditionally, Russia's a very difficult country to run. It's very big, and it has people who are not cooperative, and a lot of crime, a lot of corruption. And I think that one of the things that Putin has done is he's tried to unite the country against an external enemy. Again, in-group, out-group dynamic. And in this case, what he's done is he's tried to show that the global West is his enemy. That's the term he uses, the global West. Now, the war in Ukraine was very popular at first, but now it's very unpopular. According to the last poll that I saw, 60-something% of Russians want it to end. Not that different from what's happening in Israel and Gaza, by the way. 60-something%. Israel, it's a little bit higher.
In every regard, like a lot of the reason for it is the in-group, out-group, and they're trying to preserve he's trying to preserve his political power.
I'll say one thing for Netanyahu, and you won't hear me say this often, and for Israel, October 7th actually happened. It was a terrible thing. There was no equivalent in Ukraine. It's not that there, whatever minor things happening in eastern Ukraine, it was nothing that like that. So it was completely trumped up to pardon the pun, in the Ukrainian case. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because he's losing popularity domestically, which is so important. The fact that he can go to the U.S. and be received on the red carpet and show his people, look, I'm trying to make peace, but Zelensky isn't. That's good for his domestic standing. That's good for his marketing the war to his own people.
And good for playing Trump.
It's good for playing Trump. I don't think it's good for stopping the war. I think what would be better for stopping the war is if Trump held out that carrot of global acceptance if he makes concessions.
Yeah. Well,
and that's why I'm against it.
My solution would be to say, hey, give everything back. And and then the territory dispute will be over, and we'll let you both join NATO.
I mean, but of course, Putin doesn't want to join NATO because if he joins NATO, he has no reason to exist.
Well, the thing about it is I don't know how much of it's propaganda, just stuff that he says, but he has numerous times publicly said that he wants to take that. He really wants that deal. And a large part of the argument for why it was okay to go into Ukraine is basically a parallel to why we thought it was okay to go into Cuba. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, hey, this is a military alliance on my doorstep. It's an issue. This is too close. So if you put that out there, it takes all of his propaganda away that he's using domestically. So if it is just bullshit, you've called his bluff. If it isn't bullshit, then now we have more of a mitigating factor for Iran and China. If like I said, this is if you're playing the game that these guys say they're playing. It's like, I don't agree with that game personally, but I'm saying if that's what you're actually doing.
Yeah, I think the
reason they don't want that is because there's too many. I think the reason the U.S. doesn't want that is because it would cause a lot of the same issues we have in the UN and NATO. The fact that we can't just unilaterally say what's going to happen. You know what I mean?
I
the U.S. basically runs NATO. If you let Russia in, it's now becoming, a two-party situation where.
I don't think so. I honestly think that Russia is. I think you're overestimating Russia. Russia is a weak country. Their economy is very small. Their army is not particularly good. They have a lot of social issues. A lot of their role on the global stage comes from standing up to the United States. That's where they get a lot of their cachet. Russia is like a small dog that barks a lot and can't really bite you all that much. China's a really big dog with a lot of confidence that just sits there, right? But the Russians, in order to get attention, they need to bark a lot. If the Russians actually entered NATO as another partner, well, look at them compared to other partners of NATO with their economy, and they're not that important. Maybe they're second in NATO, but they're on a similar level in many ways to France and the UK. They're nowhere near the United States, and Putin knows that. He has no reason to exist if he's within a Western alliance. He spent a lot of time and effort weaning Russia away from the pro-Western posture that it had under Yeltsin. So I don't buy any of that. But sometimes it's good to call leaders bluffs. But we went off on a tangent again.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have people. Well, Ukraine is not a conflict that anyone can say is neglected. People do talk about it, and I think that I'd like to see us focus here on conflicts that have been neglected more. But we're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk about all of that as well. I don't want us to turn into one of these shows. There's so many of them, and there's a place for them where every week they bring on people to argue about Israel and Palestine or Ukraine and Russia. There's enough of those. We're going to look at things a little bit differently and focus more on issues that people don't look at.
Yeah, we're going to look at every war and explain exactly why it's Israel's fault, right?
Right, exactly. There's enough of those too. Yeah. We're gonna blame Israel when it deserves to be blamed and not when it doesn't. Yeah. I know. And another thing before we finish, I remember you were talking about why it's important to you to highlight positive elements of different conflicts. So I'll let you lead that one off.
Yes, and this is kind of the thing that I've said before. I mean, I know Milton Friedman has actually made this argument in regards to a pencil to make an argument about why capitalism is the greatest, but I think it's a deeper argument to the fact of like what is human cooperation. And like I said, something that I could say is like the fact that you're watching this podcast. Think about how many people cooperated to make that happen. How many people built my camera, from the people who made the components, mined the materials, to work together to do that, the people who all created the internet, the people who all like computers, all this is like we're talking about millions of people cooperating to make sure I can hit a button and talk to everybody right now. So that's the reason why a lot of these wars are so glaring to us as people, is we're like we see this negative uncooperative atmosphere. And I think that we also have to realize while we're looking at this stuff that that is the exception, not the rule. The rule is that humans cooperate. This is the reason we're at the very top of the echelon when it comes to animals in this world. It's because we cooperate with each other, because we form societies, because we form, trade, because we work together. Because somebody will break a leg and another guy will set that leg and take care of him until he's ready to work again. That is what has separated us from the animals. And it is something that, in my opinion, my biggest goal is to expand that as much as possible and make it like even less of the exception of wars and uncooperativeness. I want people to cooperate more with each other.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. The advantage that humans have over animals is cooperation. The trouble is, so much of our cooperation is in bad directions. Nothing stops us from cooperating. We're great at that. But what are we cooperating for? Just as often as not, we're cooperating for nefarious purposes, or nefarious, probably the wrong way, very self-interested purposes that are often quite destructive. And yeah, so our ability and desire to work together towards goals is incredibly powerful. And the way I would look at it is as a tool. Just like a hammer can be used to bust someone's head open, it can also be used to build something useful. And what we want to do is we want to take that ability to cooperate, and when I say we, I mean this podcast, but also human beings in general, and focus it on good things that benefit all of us. There's no question that tool is what makes human beings human beings. We have this ability to not even ability. It's more irrepressible urge to work together and create things. It's amazing, but also most of the horrible things that human beings have done have their genesis in that urge as well. So it's very important to, it's like a gun license, the human cooperation license. Are we using it for the right purposes, or are we using it for the wrong purposes? And you're absolutely right that, we need to harness that for positive. And I think we'll find in every conflict that there are people who are doing that. There are people in every conflict who are working incredibly hard to make things better for everyone. Sometimes they have more success, sometimes they have less success. That's very often because of the circumstances rather than the quality of the people. But there are just incredibly positive human stories in every conflict. And one of the things that people who, are pro-war try to do is they try to make the other side seem like they're just terrible human beings with no redeeming features. And then there's no such thing. There's no such thing as people like that. There's no such thing as people who are just bad. There's people who have
Ever heard of
circumstances.
the attribution fallacy?
Of course, the attribution fallacy. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's a fallacy, sometimes it's intentional. And in conflict, it's often
a lot of fallacies
intentional.
are intentional.
That's right. Yeah, and of course it goes together.
But to explain to everybody what that is it's the idea that the problem with them is a product of their character, but the problem with me is in reaction to my circumstances. The reason I act in ways that may not be the greatest way is because of the circumstances that I was in. But the reason that they're acting the way that they're acting is because of the character that they have. When in reality, the answer is it's always the circumstances. But there are people who have an extreme amount of moral character that, despite the circumstances, do amazingly wonderful things. Like we talk about Oscar Schindler and John Rabe during World War II. These are two great examples of that. People who took their, had a higher moral character, took a huge amount of personal risk to try to do something good. I think you've spoke about an Israeli group. I think you said it was called Standing Together, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
standing together, fantastic group.
And same thing where they're like protecting aid shipments and stuff like that. Huge personal risk to themselves. let's not pretend like a lot of these more extreme settlers are peaceful and adverse to violence. So these people are taking huge risks to themselves to do this kind of thing, to make sure that these people get food and aid that they need. So in every aspect, there are people who separate themselves by being legitimate heroes. Now, the presence of these people does not condemn the others. I think that's something that I've seen people say too, where it's like, well, there were people like Oscar Schindler, so that means all the people who were scared of their kids being killed if they didn't support the Nazis are all guilty. It's like, we could argue there is a level of they should have done more. That is true, but that is for the future. That is not a responsive. Like, this is why I say again, you're falling into the diffusion of responsibility trap.
Yep.
The people who are responsible are the people who made these decisions.
Yeah, and when we find who's guilty, it's really important to focus on the people who actively promoted evil actions, the people who went out of their way and convinced people to do that, instead of the people who didn't do enough to prevent it. It's true that I was just following orders is not an excuse, morally speaking, and it's true that people should be doing more to prevent it. But you can't. It's not moral and it's not practical to blame an entire society. It's not even moral or practical to blame an entire army or rebel organization that's involved. What you really need to do is find the people who motivated it, who planned it, who went out of their way to do it. Because if you do that, you're discouraging future crimes. Because if I do this, they'll just blame everyone, the people who actually are the driving force behind it are protected. Meanwhile, if you hold people personally accountable for their crimes, they might think twice about doing it, because every crime against humanity has masterminds behind it. It had people who, if they didn't take special effort to do it, it wouldn't be happening. Like, I see a lot of people giving collective blame to Israel for what's happening in Gaza now. And on a certain level, it's absolutely true. I say it too. There's something very wrong with Israeli society on a deep level right now. But that doesn't stop the fact that there are people who are working very hard so that these crimes occur. And if they hadn't been working this hard, if they hadn't been planning it, if they hadn't been putting political pressure and so on and so forth, it wouldn't be happening this way. People like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and of course Netanyahu and so on, they have a lot of culpability, because if they've been planning it and they've been pushing it and they've been trying to get crimes done. That doesn't absolve anyone else. It means that we want to put special attention on them and hold them culpable for what they've done, for practical and pragmatic reasons. And you want to forgive the vast amount of people in a society if they have indirect culpability, because A, it's circumstances, and B, because that gives you more of a possibility to move forward towards peace. Than if you try to hold everyone accountable, try to punish everyone, they're more likely to fight against you. Like the way Nelson Mandela said to the white population in South Africa, we're going to be forgiving, we're going to accept you. And that meant that they ended up giving up power, I wouldn't say peacefully, but not as violently as they could have.
Yeah, I actually do agree with that, and that's kind of where a lot of these conflicts, I think, have some resolution, is the fact that, like I said, you also have to remember at the end of the war, if you want to end the war at the earliest possible time, you're going to have to give some ability to save face to the enemy. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. It's the same thing. I criticize the nuclear bombs being dropped on Japan for that reason, because it's like, if you go and you look at what they were offering, because they were trying to negotiate the end of the war, it's not that different from what we got. It's just that we were able to call it an unconditional surrender. You know what I mean? And so, like, it literally, the whole war was conducted towards the end in a way that made it where the Japanese had no ability to save face. And if you had not done that, I could see the war ending a good 3 years earlier.
I don't know
So,
about 3 years earlier, but yeah, there could have been a
like,
resolution,
I
and
mean, once Stalin jumped in, it like, and Germany was dropped, like they had no hope.
right, but
Now
that
you
took
might not have
years of
gotten
fighting to
exactly
get
what
there.
we got.
Yeah, that took years of fighting to get there. That always didn't happen until May 1945. But more philosophically speaking, a lot of these civil wars, and it's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about here a lot, end with amnesty for the rebels, or amnesty even for government forces that committed crimes, or so on and so forth, just to get people to stop fighting, just to get people to put down their arms. Sometimes you have to forgive things that are pretty horrible so that you can move forward, and that balance between practicality and morality is a very difficult one to achieve, but it's one that you have
It's
to
something
get
that
right.
happened with Israel with the Irgun and Lehi, you know?
Well,
So, yeah, at a certain point,
the Irgun and the
you got to do
Lehi,
what you got to do.
the Israeli government actually cracked down on physically, but they never punished them for their crimes. They never punished them for the terror acts that they committed against Arabs. So, they managed to get the functional state power, but they never got the reconciliation element. And that's one of the many reasons that conflict was never resolved. They never even tried to get the reconciliation element. They
Or
just
the
got the
North.
pragmatic element.
We could talk about the Northern Army during the Civil War. They burned Atlanta to the ground. So like, yeah, like there's a lot of this stuff. It's like, or what I've talked about before, the colonists themselves fighting the British and tarring and feathering people. That is, you literally poured molten tar on a person, then threw feathers on them and laughed as they screamed to death. That's point blank terrorism. That's point blank an atrocity. And like I
Torture,
said,
yeah.
and all those people were assembled into the new United States Army. So like the idea that this is not a commonplace thing is interesting. But to end, a great way to end on this is the next conflict we're going to be talking about is that going wrong, horribly wrong, of trying to incorporate two militant groups into one group and then put them under a civilian government. So
That's right.
next episode will be Sudan, and that is like basically what happened.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about how this conflict started, what exactly is happening, and how to resolve it. And we're going to
So
try to
tune
do
in
that
next
for,
time.
yeah.
Thank you guys, everyone who listened to the first episode. I think I'll just leave it up. We'll put this as the easier one to listen to, but I think there was some really good information in the first one if you can bear the crunchiness.
Yeah, the horrific sound. Hopefully this one sounds
Again,
better.
my fault, not Shaiel. That's
Might have
all
been my
my
fault.
fault. I don't know what I'm doing with some of this software. We're trying a different piece of software. If it works out better, I'll probably just stick with that and give these guys
We're
my
going to get it
$10 a
down.
month.
Yeah, we're going to get it down. Don't you worry. All right.
So
So
thanks
until
again
next
for
time,
tuning in.
thank you so much.